It started at noon, when three so-called HOA guards parked their SUV right outside my gate and refused to move. At first, I thought they were lost. But then one of them leaned on my fence and said, "We're here until you apologize to Karen for causing her breakdown." I laughed, until I realized they weren't joking. They waited. Hour after hour. The sun dropped, neighbors watched, and still, they didn't leave. By sunset, I wasn't just dealing with harassment. I was dealing with an organized intimidation campaign, led by the woman I'd just beaten in court. Real justice moments like this remind us that standing your ground isn't arrogance, it's survival. So before we begin, drop your city or country in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story of resistance travels. And if you believe no one should ever be bullied into an apology they don't owe, hit that like button and subscribe, because this channel stands for stories where truth faces power and wins. The first hour felt more like a bad joke than a threat. Three men in fake-looking security uniforms leaned against their SUV, parked right across my front gate, arms folded, acting like they owned the place. I assumed they were lost, or maybe mistaking me for someone else. But when I stepped out onto my porch and called out, "Can I help you?" one of them, tall, shaved head, mirrored sunglasses, replied without hesitation, "We're here until you apologize to Karen." At first, I laughed. Apologize? For what? For causing her breakdown, the man said flatly. That's when my stomach turned. Karen Little, my neighbor, the ex-president of the HOA, the same woman who'd harassed me for months over a property line she didn't even control. The same woman I'd just beaten in court after a long, humiliating case that ended with her losing everything. And now, apparently, she'd sent guards. I told them to leave. They didn't move. Instead, they unfolded camping chairs and set them on the sidewalk, directly in front of my gate. One even opened a small cooler and pulled out a soda like they were settling in for the long haul. By 2 p.m., the neighborhood had noticed. Cars slowed down. A few people took photos. Julia, my wife, came to the front window and whispered, "Danny, what are they doing?" "Trying to scare us," I said quietly. That's all this is. But it didn't feel small anymore. I called the sheriff's office, explained what was happening. The dispatcher sighed and said, "Sir, if they're not trespassing and not blocking your driveway, it's technically a civil matter. If they cross the gate, call us back." Typical. So I installed myself in my living room, watching through the security cameras, the SUV's engine idling, the guards pacing, occasionally glancing at their watches. One of them waved at my camera deliberately, grinning. Hours passed. At 3:15, Julia tried to take our dog out. One guard stepped forward, arms crossed, and said, "Ma'am, best to stay inside until Mr. Miller apologizes. Things will go easier that way." Julia froze. I stepped out the front door and told him if he spoke to my wife again, I'd file harassment charges. He smirked but backed off. That smirk said everything. They knew exactly what they were doing. By 4 p.m., the tension had turned surreal. A neighbor named Lucas stopped by, phone in hand. "Man, what's going on? People say Karen had a breakdown, now these guys are camped here for you." I shrugged. Guess she's redefining what breakdown means. He laughed nervously and left. The guards never even looked at him. Their focus never shifted from my gate. I tried calling Karen's old attorney through voicemail. Then I tried the HOA office. A new temp secretary picked up and said, "Mr. Miller, Karen's recovering from a mental health episode. We'd appreciate if you didn't escalate things." I hung up mid-sentence. Didn't escalate things? She had people outside my home in uniform. At 5 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. A shaky female voice came through the line, soft but venomous. "Danny, it's Karen." I didn't say a word. "You embarrassed me in court. You made me look crazy in front of everyone. I just want you to fix this. Just say you're sorry. Publicly. That's all." I took a deep breath. You sent people to my house, Karen. They're not hurting you, she said, almost cheerfully. They just want to make things right. By intimidating me? By helping you understand the damage you caused. And then, click. The line went dead. Julia stared at me. That was her, wasn't it? Yeah. Danny, this isn't normal anymore. She was right. This wasn't HOA drama, this was psychological warfare. At 6 o'clock, the guard started reading something aloud, a printed document with the HOA's letterhead. Their leader, the bald one, read it line by line through a megaphone. We hereby issue a community citation to resident Daniel Miller for harassment leading to emotional distress of a former HOA officer. Failure to comply with the terms of reconciliation will result in continued public action. It was all fake, legal nonsense, half-made-up words, but it didn't matter. The point wasn't the law. The point was humiliation. Neighbors watched from driveways. Cars slowed down to film. I could feel my hands shaking as I called Detective Reed, the same man who'd handled the earlier harassment case. Detective, it's Miller. She's doing it again. She sent people. They've been outside 6 hours. His tone changed instantly. Stay inside. I'm on my way. At 6:35, sirens echoed down the street. Blue and red lights splashed across the trees. The guard straightened up, suddenly nervous. One whispered to another, grabbed his bag, started toward the SUV. Don't move, the deputy yelled as 2 cruisers boxed them in. Within minutes, they were in handcuffs. The bald one tried to talk, saying, "We were just doing what she asked." Detective Reed looked at me across the fence. "You've got it all on camera?" "Every second." "Good. This time, we'll make sure she can't twist it around." As they loaded the guards into the cruiser, the street filled with murmurs, whispers, the sound of cameras clicking. And for the first time in hours, I exhaled. The standoff was over, but I knew, deep down, this wasn't the end. Karen Little had just made her final move, and it was going to cost her everything. The night those guards were arrested, the street stayed lit up long after the cruisers left. Blue and red lights painted my driveway, reflecting off the iron gate like a warning sign. Neighbors stood in clusters, whispering, trading theories, trying to make sense of what had just happened. To me, it was simple. Karen had lost control of her little kingdom, and this was her final tantrum. But what I didn't realize that night was that the chaos had only just begun. The next morning, Detective Reed called. His tone was sharp, businesslike. We questioned the 3 men. They were hired by Karen directly. Said she paid them $500 each for the protest. She even wrote up those fake citations herself. I sighed. You have proof? Oh, plenty. They showed us the texts, screenshots, bank transfers. She used HOA funds for part of it. That line stopped me cold. HOA funds. Not just personal revenge, embezzlement. Reed continued, we're bringing her in today. The district attorney's office wants to file charges for harassment, witness intimidation, and misuse of association funds. I hung up and sat on the porch. Julia brought me coffee, her eyes tired but relieved. It's really over this time, she asked. I didn't answer immediately. I've learned not to believe anything's over until the courtroom doors close. By that afternoon, news vans had rolled into the neighborhood. Local HOA president accused of harassment and fraud flashed on TV screens. Reporters tried to get statements from anyone within 10 feet of my gate. I stayed silent. I'd said my piece long ago, in court, under oath, with evidence. Karen was arrested at her home just 2 blocks away. They said she screamed the entire time, insisting she was the real victim. He ruined me. He turned everyone against me. Neighbors filmed it from their porches. Within hours, the footage hit social media, and overnight, the story went viral. People across the state shared it as the HOA harassment case. It wasn't just local gossip anymore, it had become a symbol of what happens when power turns petty and rules turn into weapons. 2 weeks later, I sat in the courtroom again. Same beige walls, same dull lights, same air of exhaustion. Karen was there too, disheveled, pale, a shadow of her old self. Her lawyer spoke in circles, trying to frame her behavior as a mental health crisis exacerbated by public humiliation. But the evidence spoke louder than any defense. Screenshots of payments to the guards. Fake HOA letters on her personal laptop. Surveillance footage from my property showing the men pacing for hours. The audio recording of her phone call demanding an apology. When the prosecution played that call aloud, the entire courtroom went silent. "You embarrassed me in court. You made me look crazy, just say you're sorry." Those words hung in the air like smoke. Even Karen's attorney couldn't look at her. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't go for drama. I just said the truth. I never wanted to fight my neighbors. I just wanted to live in peace. But when you let power go unchecked, even something as small as an HOA, it turns into this. People get hurt. Lives get ruined. All because someone can't stand to lose control. The judge nodded slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Miller." He turned to Karen. His voice was calm but cutting. "Ms. Little, you abused your authority, violated a court order, and endangered others. You are hereby sentenced to 6 months in county jail and permanent removal from the HOA board." Her eyes went wide. She tried to speak, but the deputies were already taking her away. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. Just relief and a strange kind of pity. Karen had built her whole identity around control. And now, stripped of it, she looked like someone who didn't know how to exist anymore. Weeks passed. The HOA board dissolved entirely. Most residents voted to disband it rather than risk another Karen situation. The neighborhood, once tense and divided, began to feel normal again. Julia and I replaced our old wooden fence with a new iron gate, not out of fear, but as a statement. Boundaries matter. So does peace. One evening, Reed stopped by. "You know," he said, "cases like this, they usually end in tragedy. You handled it better than most." I smiled faintly. "I just refused to play her game." He nodded. "And that's why you won." A month later, I hosted a small barbecue, nothing fancy, just neighbors, laughter, normal conversation. Someone mentioned Karen's sentencing had been reduced for good behavior. I just shrugged. Whatever happened next wasn't my concern anymore. As the sun set behind the trees, a soft orange glow hit the gate, the same gate where those guards once stood for 6 hours. For a moment, I remembered that day, the heat, the fear, the helplessness. And then I looked around at my yard, my friends, my peace, and realized it was finally over. "They waited 6 hours for an apology I never gave," I said quietly. And that was the day their power ended at my gate. Julia smiled beside me. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of grilled food and laughter through the air. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes, it simply stood its ground and waited.